So I'm sure everybody has hit this context limit within the last few weeks. Most frustrating thing on the planet, but you have to think about context more like an ongoing hygiene issue than something that you're going to fix once and then just leave it for the rest of your life. AI is moving ridiculously fast and you cannot expect something to stay static. We have to evolve alongside this landscape. So in this video, I'm going to explore a bunch of concepts that will help us solve this problem, but then I'm also going to give you a skill that will get you out of the weeds as fast as possible. So let's get into the first part, and this is the biggest problem currently out there. It is that your tokens are compounding. So whenever you start a conversation with AI, it starts off pretty good. But then as soon as you invoke some skills and you activate some MCP tools, those all get loaded into your context. But then the conversation compounds over time because this magical memory that you think AI has is actually just the conversation that you're currently having. Now, obviously, we have progressive disclosure for skills and lazy loading for MCP, but that doesn't mean that we are immune to this problem, because as soon as we activate a skill, it gets pulled into that conversation in full force. So we're going to talk a little bit about those things later on, but right now I want to address this compounding problem straight out of the bat, because conversation one starts with a little bit of tokens, and by the end of it, you are pretty much burning through your entire usage just because you are stuck inside one conversation. So there are 4 simple fixes that we can do for fixing this compounding context problem. First one being clear, and that's literally what it sounds like. You're going to wipe context between unrelated tasks. To me, this seems kind of pointless because you could just literally start a new conversation instead of clearing the context of this. But of course, there are times where you might not be able to do that. So then you would just use /clear, and that's going to do exactly what it sounds like. Resets the counter. Next up, we have rewind, and this one's pretty interesting because whenever you're talking to AI, if it first suggests a bad solution and implements something terrible, you might go back to that and say, hey, this was terrible, you need to go and fix that, this is what the solution actually is. But the problem with that is that both the good and the bad get put in that conversation if you keep talking in the same window. So rewind is pretty handy in the sense that we can come over here, we can hit /rewind, and you can see that we have messages that we can restore, and then it will fork the conversation from that point. And it's much more efficient to do that than to continue the conversation in this thing where you had a whole bunch of back and forths between good and bad. Next up is manipulating the auto compaction. So normally it happens at 83%, but they found that quality drops before that. So you can set it statically to 75% and then just give it some hints inside your Claude.md so that it actually sticks to that rule. And then of course, if you wanted to enforce it, you could probably use hooks for that as well. And that way it would always auto compact at 75%. Then number 4, the spec.md handoff. This is probably the biggest thing that you can do out there. So if you are building a large task with AI, and let's just say that it worked on the first chunk and it did a really good job and you really want to stay in that context window, but you know it's going to be super inefficient, what do? You get it to build out a spec.md file for you that is essentially handing it off to another person on the team, if you had to think about it from a human perspective. So they could pick up this paper and know exactly what you were working on, what the best way to do it is, and they would be able to just get started with work. So that's essentially what Claude is doing over here. It's creating a handover doc for a new agent window where we wouldn't have all of that bloated context polluting whatever it is that we were currently doing. Because remember, what we're trying to do here is start new conversations when we realize that our context window is starting to get really full before that compounding effect takes place. So this is probably going to be your biggest saving when you're dealing with big builds. But we do need to talk about the usage tax before we have even done a single thing. So you can see here, this is a brand new session. I just typed in /context. And you can see everything that is currently being eaten before we have done everything. This has obviously gotten a lot better than it used to be. A few months ago, we didn't have lazy loading for MCP. So this 143K, this would have actually been taken from me before I'd actually done anything, which is why I've never been bullish on MCP as a whole. You can see system tools has also been deferred. So we're actually saving a little bit of tokens now, thanks to lazy loading. But something you need to keep in mind, as soon as I use one of these tools, they then do become part of the workflow. You can see we've got quite a lot in here. So depending on what my workflow was and what it was using, it would then start to activate these things, and they obviously then eat my tokens. So our goal over here is to be as efficient as we can with all of these different parts of our system, because everything is done in layers, and we can manipulate different sections of whatever it is that we're doing in order to make them as efficient as possible, and that way we start off by burning less tokens. So that's what we're going to be covering in the rest of this video. And like I said, the skill audit that I'm going to give you is also going to help you understand where you can be better in your environment. So let's get into the first thing. So first up is MCP servers. We can address this quite easily because we can just use CLI alternatives. If you're using things like Supabase or Vercel and tons of other apps out there, they have a CLI alternative which has absolutely no MCP bloat attached to it, and it's often way more efficient to use it. Now, even though we have lazy loading, once we start a conversation with Claude and it starts to pull in tools in order to achieve its goals, those form part of the context window. But with CLI, that token amount is way less, which means our conversations don't get bloated and we obviously save a ton of tokens. it is the easiest thing for you to fix because you can just get the skill that I'm about to give you to audit all of this and then get it to find CLI alternatives for you, and it will use it in the exact same way, just at a programmatic layer. And of course, you will still need to use MCP for some things that don't have the CLI layer, but at least you'll be way more efficient than you were when you started out. And then next up we have LSP, and this is a really good way to save a ton of tokens if you're building with a specific language out there. So it doesn't matter if you're building actual software or if you're writing skills that have a ton of Python scripts attached to them. This thing's going to save you a lot of tokens because of the way that it works. So traditionally, when AI is going out there and searching through code, it uses text-based search. It's going to use grep for that sort of thing. So if you're looking for where is authenticate used, goes with grep and it will search through a bunch of files until it finds this thing. And that can be really hungry and use a lot of tokens. What LSP does, or Language Server Protocol, is that it essentially sets up a map for Claude to go and read where specific things might be listed. So when we search where is authenticate used once we have LSP set up, it knows exactly where to find this thing because it's mapped specific symbol locations, and it doesn't have to read the entire file in order to find that out. So that's where we get the token savings. And obviously, depending on the size of the thing that you're working on and how many files it would have to read, that would depend on how many tokens you ultimately save. But there are definitely tokens to be saved here for most people building right now. Setting it up is pretty easy. You just need to come on over to your plugins. Once you're over here, you need to make sure that you've got both of Anthropic's marketplaces attached. You can see here I've got the plugins and the skills. Anyway, you'll head on over to plugins and you want to grab the one for the language that you predominantly use in your environment. For me, that's Python. And if you guys aren't really developers and you haven't thought about this, it's probably defaulting to Python. You can always check that based on the skills that you've been writing. If you come and have a look inside here, and if you have a look at any of the scripts, you'll see these are all .py. That means it's Python. If it was .ts, it might be TypeScript, that sort of thing, in which case you would grab the specific skill for whatever it is that you're doing. So we're going to go with Python for this. I got the pywrite-lsp. There is one for whatever language your environment is using. If this was TypeScript, it would be TypeScript-lsp. You get the point. You want to make sure that you hit install on your specific one. That sets up the plugin. Now we need to focus on the server. I'm looking for LSP for TypeScript. Can you set that up for me? And there you go. You can see that this thing will tell you exactly what you need to do. And of course, you don't need to go away and do this. You can then just say, can you do this for me? And it will run the npm install specifically for TypeScript or Python, whatever it is that you're using. And that's it. You then have LSP set up. But Claude isn't that smart in the sense that it doesn't always use this. So sometimes if I go and search for something, it will still use grep. So one of the best things you can do is set up a hook for this so that it's enforced. With hooks, Claude cannot bypass it because it is programmatic, meaning that every single time a specific thing happens, Claude has to abide by this type of thing. In this case, we will manipulate something called a pre-tool use hook, which fires before it's about to use a tool. In this case, grep would be that tool. And you can set up hooks yourself. They live in your settings.json or settingslocal.json. You can see on the right-hand side, we have them set up over here. I have a whole bunch of them. But one of the easiest ways to set up a hook is obviously in the context window where you just set up your LSP with Claude. Get it to go and enforce this with a hook for you. It will set it up properly and stash it in the file for you so that you don't actually need to go and write a single line. That's exactly what I did. There is also a GitHub repo where some guy has made about 7 hooks that tie in with this. I think it's overkill for most environments, but still worth checking out. Once Claude has set up your hook, you will need to restart Visual Code or whatever IDE that you're using so that it actually gets registered. And you probably will only start to notice this thing when it's going out there and building scripts and refactoring things and revisiting older files within its context, as opposed to something that you're going to be seeing in your everyday workflow, unless your everyday workflow is literally developing software or building a large amount of scripts. This topic obviously needs its own video in itself, and I will cover that in another one later on. But for now, this will set you up with just enough context savings for whatever it is that you're doing day to day. Next up is Claude.md, and a lot of people bloat this thing to hell and back. Mine used to look like a homeless person's dugout, but I've recently made it a lot more efficient, and I think it's only about 50 lines now if I have to take a look. The point is we want to try and keep this as efficient as possible because it is loaded into every single session that you have. More importantly, a lot of the things that we used to put into the Claude.md can actually be solved with hooks or rules.md and various other places. You could even argue that a lot of the things we used to put in rules we don't need there anymore because skills cater for those as a part of the deterministic functions of the scripts that you're using in order to complete your business workflow with the skill itself. So first up is to ask yourself, does Claude already do this? And if you don't know if Claude already does that, just ask Claude if it does that. What a lot of people do is they put things in there that don't need to be in there. For instance, when the skill creator came out a few months ago, I had a line inside my Claude.md that told Claude to use this thing to create skills. But Claude already knows to use that to create skills. So it was a massive waste, and that's because of the way that I used to work before skills came along and I was trying to match the deterministic nature with the probabilistic nature of AI, if you've seen some of my older videos. Anyway, things like that are what will bloat your Claude.md over time. So like I said, keep this very lean. Next up is contradiction. So does it conflict with another rule that you have set up somewhere else? Again, you would need to audit this, because if you had a hook set up that was already taking care of something that you left stale inside your Claude.md, obviously you can get rid of it from Claude.md. And if there is something urgent, you should probably be using hooks, because obviously Claude cannot bypass that, so just something to remember. Next up, we have redundancy. Is the thing that you've got in your Claude.md already covered? Kind of ties in with the first two, but like I said, it might also be tied in with the skill that you have already created, in which case the specific line inside your Claude.md might be redundant. So you can always check for redundancies by comparing your Claude.md with some of the things that you've got set up in your environment. Next up is a band-aid. So you shouldn't have fixes in there for bad output. You should try and fix the thing that is putting bad output in the first place, instead of doing this. Pretty self-explanatory. Next up is vagueness. You don't want to be vague. You want to be very, very specific about what is in your Claude.md, and more importantly, in the way that you write it. Don't have vague statements in there. It should tell Claude exactly what you're trying to do, or the exact message that you're trying to get across to it. And then finally, like I said, only universal stuff applies here. Everything else goes into skills for task-specific guidelines and rules and whatever it is that you need. That brings us neatly into skills, where they are progressive. So what this actually means is tier 1, your skill names get loaded in every single session. That's always going to happen. And that just helps Claude understand what is actually in your environment. Then next up we have tier 2, which is your descriptions for the skills themselves. Those are truncated, so they're truncated to 250 characters. And again, you can see this is why it's called progressive disclosure, because we're going by tier in case that wasn't clear enough. So these will only be loaded if Claude ever needs to go out there and decide that this is the skill that it needs for whatever it is that it's going to be running. So here in my environment, we have an example of a description. You want to try and keep these things as tidy as possible, simply because Claude uses this in order to invoke the skill. So you want to make sure that it understands exactly what it is. And that forms part of building the skill properly. I have videos on how to build skills and things like that. I'll leave them in the description below. But just think of it as reading, oh, hey, this is AI audit. That might be something I need. Then it will go and read the description. And in the description, it figures out what it is going to be doing. And only after it's matched this description, then it loads the entirety of the skill. And that's what consumes all of your tokens. So that's why we need to be efficient here. But also you can kind of think about it this way. If this skill is, let's just say it's massively bloated, if you're only running it once a week, it's not the end of the world. For me, I have a lead gen skill that's like 800 lines. It's really long. It goes through a whole bunch of different workflows, but I only run that on a Monday. So for me, it's not a problem. I'm not eating tons of context by doing that. If I was running it every single day, it would be far more problematic, and then I would probably go out there and address it in a different way. But from that perspective, I'm perfectly fine. So when you are going through your skills and you're trying to make them efficient, think about it from that angle as well. Are you using this thing constantly? Because if it's always in your top 5 skills, that's obviously contributing to eating a lot of your tokens, which is ruining your usage. Another thing you might want to take into context here is the model that you're using to run these skills out there. Not every single skill is going to need Opus, even though it is the best model. A lot of them can get away with even Haiku. So you've got to think about that as part of your planning as well, because you're going to save a lot of tokens that way too. Next up is the effort level. So by default, extended thinking is enabled, but extended thinking is billed as output tokens, which, if you understand your token terminology, are the expensive ones. You pay more for output than input because of the amount of processing and engineering that it takes to actually get you the output. So what happens here is when you're using this, you end up paying a lot more for this when you don't need to. So there are simple fixes that you can do for this, and it all comes down to planning properly, just like we spoke about in skills on this slide, where you would want to use specific models for certain things. For this, you want to use different levels of thinking for different tasks. So for simple tasks, we want to have the effort set to low. That's probably one of the easiest wins over there. If you're doing something that doesn't require extended thinking or a lot of effort, set those tasks to low. Use something like Haiku or Sonnet in order to achieve that task. That will save you a lot of tokens. You can also cap your routine work by setting export max thinking tokens equals 8,000, and that will set a max budget for this type of thing. And then you will only be billed for higher things if you opt in for the more expensive work. And these are really simple things that you can do today to go and fix your context. But of course, I wouldn't expect you to go out there and do all of this work manually. So I've created a context audit skill that will go through everything and more that we discussed in these slides, tell you how bad your environment currently is, what you can do in order to fix it, and then you can just go out there and do it, or get Claude to do it for you if you want to go and burn some context doing that. Run my context audit skill. So while that skill is running in the background, we can come and have a look at my Claude Command Center. This is attached to my AI operating system, and you can see I've got the IDE version over here and then Cowork on the right-hand side. We're going to have a look at the skill specifically because I wanted to illustrate a point. So I've got my top skills over here listed by most tokens eaten. So Excalidraw is obviously taking up most of them because it's extremely hungry in the way that this thing works. It's also probably because the skill in my dev environment that builds all of these decks that you see it's very inefficient and I tend to have very long conversations with them. So you can see how that stuff adds up over time. And keep in mind that this isn't just today. That would be a ridiculous token count. This is over the last 30 days. More importantly, what we can do is we can come down here and we can see some of the sessions that I've set up before. So these are really hungry sessions that I've had previously. Then inside here, you can see that I have a complete breakdown of all the tools that were used, how many times they were invoked, and any other skills that were invoked as a part of this session that I had inside Cowork or my IDE. And this helps me understand what's actually going on in my environment. Observability is one of the most important things you can have for your environment because it helps you troubleshoot the stuff like context problems that we have. And when we feed the information from our audit into here over time, your dashboard can be updated with that information too. And you can see here that my context audit is now done. I got an amazing score of 38 out of 100 in my dev environment. This is all broken down from the /context we did earlier for my Sonnet model. I've only used 20K of the 200K tokens. Obviously, if this was Opus, it would be 1 million. But then off of this, the skill will literally go out there and figure out all of the things that we spoke about in this video and a few other things that I didn't mention just because they were so minor that they just belong in the skill. Anyway, you can now see we have a comprehensive report that will tell us exactly what we need to do in order to save a whole bunch of tokens inside our environment. It will then also tell you the top 5 fixes based on all of these things out there. So what I would do is I would take the skill straight from the description below, put it in your environment, and just make sure that you run this on a routine, say every single month, just to make sure that you haven't drifted after your initial run. After you've done that, you should be saving a ton of tokens. Just something to keep in mind. It will give you a systems checklist that tells you any of the things that you're doing that are actually good right now. You can see it picked up that I was using Pyrite for the LSP thing that I spoke about earlier, and a few other things in here as well. So I hope this video was helpful. Please leave some comments below and I'll get back to you as soon as possible. Otherwise, check out the videos on the screen now. They'll definitely help you in your journey. Or you can join my community where I'm helping people build AI native businesses every single day. Thanks very much for watching. See you guys later.